Hey friends, welcome back. We are continuing our Native American groups or American Indian groups in Texas. We've completed the Caddo, the Karankawa, and Jumano, and today we're starting with the Lipan Apache. Now, we started on page 12 with these, and we should have done the Caddo. Then yesterday with me, you guys did the Karankawa and the Jumano, and then on your next blank page, we're going to be working on the Lipan Apache. So at the top, write the word Lipan Apache. All right. Oh, that's a little. There we go. So Lipan Apache is the fourth group that we're going to be talking about, and they're another very interesting group. They actually ended up being just called the Apache. They eventually just became the Apache Indians, and they were a very well known and very well feared group by the time everything was said and done. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I wanted to tell you guys one of the really cool things that I found out about the Lipan Apache is I'm not sure. These are the names, I believe, of the Lipan Apache. And I'm not even going to try and say the names in their language, but I will tell you what they translated to. So there's one group that's called the Red Hair People, another group called the Sun Otter People, and People of the Pines, the Red Clay People, the Tall Grass People, and then one of my favorites is the Pulverizing People. There's another one called the High-Beaked Moccasin People. So there's some amazing names. The Big Water People, the Painted Wood People, No Water People. So there's all these different names that they came up for the Lipan Apaches. And if you take a look at the slide, you can see the Lipan Apaches lived in the western part of Texas. So we just finished talking about the Jumano, who lived over here in the western part of Texas. And the Apache actually lived in this little section, and then they also lived in New Mexico as well. So they lived in, it wasn't just like this little triangle area. It was a much larger area that ended up going into a bit of northern Texas as well. Remember when the Lipan Apache and the Jumano and the Karankawa and the Caddo were around, there were no states. It was just a big open wide area. But since we're talking about Texas, we're kind of just focusing in on the people who lived here in Texas. So again, they lived in the western Texas, and they lived between the Jumano and the Comanche groups. And they were nomads. The Lipan Apache did not really stick around very, very much, but eventually they started realizing, hey, we can plant crops, and so they would plant their crops and then maybe go visit other people and then come back eventually to where they had started from with their crops. Let me see. And let's do one more slide before we go back to our notes. The Lipan Apaches were actually one of the groups who really started having some interesting times after the Europeans arrived. Once the Europeans arrived, so people from England and Spain and all of the countries over Germany, those countries over there, they brought horses. And when the Lipan Apache got horses, they became really, really good riders. So they were great at riding horses, and they were also really good fighters. So after that, they became one of the most feared groups in the area because they would go around and raid and fight with other groups in order to get what they needed. So we're going to go ahead and start, and we're writing with our general information. So our general information is that they lived in western Texas. Remember, TX is the shortened version of Texas. They lived between, and I'm going to actually shorten the word between to BTW, not by the way. This is for between. Oh, and I'm going to add an N on it. That way we know. Between the Jumano and Comanche. And they were nomads who returned to crops. So they were kind of nomadic, and then they were kind of good at stopping in where they were supposed to. Once again, as always, if you need to pause the video in order to catch up on notes, you're more than welcome to do so. And the rest of us are going to go ahead and continue on. The Lipan Apache depended on the buffalo. So they used a lot of buffalo, and this would be a lovely picture of a buffalo down here on the left-hand corner. In the center picture, that's an actual buffalo hide that's being stretched out like the Lipan Apache would do. And they use that to dry, and they would then take the buffalo hide and they would make teepees, their dwellings, and also their clothes out of the buffalo hides. We're going to go ahead and add that into our notes. So over here on my notes section, we are going to talk about shelter. And our shelter we just talked about said that they had teepees of buffalo skin. All right. Oh, let me find my PowerPoint again. There we are. Okay. So, oops, that was the last slide of our PowerPoint. However, I do want to go over a couple of other things for the Lipan Apache that were in the PowerPoint, but probably not as well defined as others. So we also talked about food for the other three, and we're going to talk about food for our Lipan Apache as well. And the Lipan Apache, as you might imagine, we talked up here how they were nomads who returned to crops. So that right there lets me infer, it lets me know that they were farmers who ate different plants. But then we also talked about how they used buffalo skin in order to build their shelter. So we know that they were hunters and that they hunted the buffalo. Also living in that area were deer. So they also hunted those deer just like the Humano did as well. So we have the buffalo and the deer that they hunt for. Our next section is going to be the resources. I'm going to go ahead and move this up just a little bit. Again, go ahead and feel free to pause the video whenever you need to in order to catch up. Don't feel like you have to write as fast as Ms. Rogge does. So our resources. I feel like there was a section in there that was supposed to let us know that they traded for their resources. But I don't know where that PowerPoint went. I do know that the Lipan Apache actually traded with Humano. For their resources, specifically for wood, because they did not have any access to wood in the desert area that they live. And then remember we talked about how they had those horses, and they became a really feared people because they would go around raiding other groups. So sometimes after they had those horses, they would go around and raid other tribes to get what they needed. It was not very kind, and it was not very good, but there was not really anybody to stop them either. All right, and last but not least, we have our government. And just like the Humano, the Lipan Apache actually had each tribe had its own government. And they were pretty autonomous. They didn't really get together and work together. So each tribe had its own government. And most tribes, not all, but most tribes had a chief in charge of that group. Okay? So again, this is our information on the Lipan Apache. If you need to pause the video in order to finish writing out the notes, you are welcome to do so at this time. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining.